Victoria, I'm going to be going through your portfolio today. I'm going to just start off by going through your whole portfolio as a whole, and then I'm going to talk about every piece. I noticed you also have a couple questions that you wanted me to answer, and so I'm just going to talk about those really quickly. You asked in your artist statement, do you have enough variety in medium? And I would say yes. You have watercolor, acrylic, charcoal, pen and ink, graphite, photography, digital, and sculpture. I think that's plenty to choose from. Any committee that's looking at your work will be able to say you aren't afraid to try anything. And that's really, really good. In this situation, it may or may not serve you better to actually narrow down your list of mediums, because if you start to do too much, it almost gets overwhelming. And sometimes the simpler, the better. Another question you asked is how do you show more variety? I don't think variety is really your problem or your issue when it comes to anything artistic. I'm going to assume just for now you're going to mean your storytelling and stuff. How do you show more variety in what you want to make? A lot of times you're going to get assignments and you'll have to do things based off of that. Maybe give yourself certain assignments or projects, stories that you want to tell, and that might be a way to introduce yourself to creating more variety in your work. You also ask, what can I improve on in terms of composition? Composition is supposed to serve the story. So no matter what you're trying to say, your composition has to be a slave to the story that you're telling. So some things that work for one piece will not work for another one. Centralized compositions are usually not the best thing to do all the time, unless you're trying to show something like a king or a deity, someone in a position of power. Then a centralized composition is helpful. Composition is also something that is going to be studied in depth when you get to art school afterwards too, because composition is like color. You can't really master it per se. You're always going to be learning and growing from it. I wouldn't worry about that too much right now. You also ask, what else should you add? I think you have a lot of great stuff in your portfolio, but I would just add whatever interests you. If, for example, you like concept art and illustration, which you say in your artist statement, then put a few pieces of those in. Try your hand at, creating a character design or creating a keyframe illustration of something you would see in a game or a show or something like that. Just have fun with it, because like I said, I think you have a lot of good stuff in your portfolio, and now it's really just refining everything. So the first piece I want to talk about is this black and white portrait that you have here. I definitely think this needs to go in your portfolio. I think it shows a great sense of lighting. It looks dramatic. The composition serves you well. It shows your technical ability really, really well. It really shows your strength as a draftsman. One of the things that does need some work though is the way you treat your shading and your edges. And some of the areas like in the deltoid and in the cheek, it looks a little muddy and a little bit like there's some dirt on the model's face and body. If there's any way you could kind of smudge those out, or, well, I guess it really depends on what you're trying to go for. I couldn't help but notice that. I really do like what you're doing with the hair, especially the ponytail. That's a nice touch. One of the things that I really appreciate is you're not afraid to let your darks run off. And what I mean by that is you have the bottom of the figure trailing off into the darkness of the background, and that's perfectly fine. And I think it looks beautiful, actually. You had 3 photographs in here. I picked this one just because it's my favorite of the 3. I think it has the best composition of them all, and I also like the contrast and value. You have this figure who's wearing a black dress. It's primarily dark in terms of the lighting scheme, but behind her and behind the smoke and the trees and everything, it's just really, really light. It's very impactful and it's very cinematic. As much as I appreciate this, I don't know if this is something you want to have in your portfolio, because it doesn't appear to be something that goes along with the rest of your work. It kind of just stands out, and I don't know where it's coming from. Now, if you're interested in photography and all those things, that's totally fine. It's just something to think about. So if this is something that you are really interested in doing, then leave it in there. But if it's something that you're kind of about, I wouldn't feel too bad about leaving it out. I do appreciate the piece for the storytelling and what you are doing with the lighting. I think you've done something really nice here. First off, I would actually put these 2 images and one JPEG file, just put them next to each other, because it's the same thing and it's not 2 separate pieces. But I think it looks really, really cool, honestly. I think it has a lot of really neat shapes in there. The lighting is good. It's just a cool structure overall. It's almost self-explanatory in that way. If you're interested in 3D modeling, this is something that would be really cool to see in a 3D structure. I could totally see a video game character just exploring this little terrain and going up those stairs and seeing what's there. It's really, really cool. But again, it also stands out in your portfolio a lot. I like all three of them, but I think the weakest one is the one with the mountain. And the reason being is the colors just seem a little too discordant. Something about it feels a little off. And I think it's probably just that mountain is a little too orange and some of the greens get a little distracting as well. And this looks like it was done in Illustrator or Photoshop. I would just make a new layer and kind of neutralize the background by putting like a soft glaze of blue or light blue over it. And I think that will probably fix the problem. The bike doesn't really stand out when it comes to the handlebars. The colors, the purples that you have are too similar. The bike is something that's supposed to stand out a lot, so I think you should find a way to change that, change the color of it, maybe make that an orange or like the yellow that you have in the bottom right corner, just to give a sense of depth, because you're achieving the depth very well in the background mountains. I just think it's starting to lose that atmosphere when it comes to the bike and then the mountain right after that. The next piece in the triptych, you have the sunset. I think this is actually my favorite of the three that you've done. I really love the complementary colors that you're using here. This scheme works so well, and it's consistent with the other two that you're doing. The one thing I would ask is, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, you have to change it, but I would just ask, what is your focal point? Is your focal point that sunset, or is it that bicycle? It seems like there are two sunsets by the way the light is shining, because you have one part on the left that is a bright white, and that's how we usually perceive the sun's colors, is white. But then you also on the right side have like a orangish yellow color. It makes it look like the sun's in two different places at the same time. So I would just be aware of that. I don't know if you're using photo reference. If that's how it looked, then it's fine. But that's something I just would question. That's just me personally. And also maybe toning down the light you have on the side of the buildings in the middle ground, just because the light looks like it's coming from a different direction altogether now, because the sun's on the left side, then the light wouldn't be showing on the right side of those buildings. I like this image a lot as well. You were asking about composition earlier, and I think that one thing you could do to fix this is trying to have your weight distributed more evenly. And what I mean by weight is visual weight. So you have the moon, you have the bicycle, and you have the clouds and such. And right now it feels like the right side of the image is a little heavy. Yeah, I would switch the direction of the sky. You can leave the clouds where they are, but I would have the moon more above the clouds. I would probably have that be a little bit brighter. It's clearly shining light onto the water, and I think you want to have the moon be just a little bit brighter. I think the bike stands out. Watch out for that tangent that you have between the bike and the horizon line. That's really cutting it close, and I would either move the bike down or move the horizon line up or something like that, because that's something you don't want in your compositions ever. You never want that, because what it does is it destroys the depth. I like where you're going with this one. I think the lighting is probably the strongest aspect you have here. Some of the ways you're drawing the figure and sculpting it is a little strange. I don't really understand those muscles that you have on the back. It looks a little strange. The scapula on the left side is fine. The center of the back, that's giving me a few issues. Your head is a little too low. The head should be a little bit higher, probably a little bit bigger too. If you were to turn your head, have your chin rest on your shoulder as best you could, you would see it's actually pretty close to the edge of it. This figure doesn't appear to be doing that. So yeah, I would make the head bigger and maybe the neck a little bit longer. Your composition's great, your colors are great. It's just the way you're kind of using the medium that I think is really making it look a little strange in the back. Keep in mind that you want more detail in the areas where you want us to look. And I'm just going to assume that you want us to look in the face. So spend all your time on that. I don't want to be distracted by the back having all these strange dips and peaks and valleys that it causes me to look at that more than the face. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so this next piece I want to talk about is a piece that I don't think you should have in your portfolio, but irrespective of that, I actually do like this drawing. This is the Over the Golden Fields piece that you did. The reason I say don't put it in is because it looks like an anime movie poster, and I know that's what you're going for, but when it comes to applying for art school, that's a big no-no. Drawing something in an anime style doesn't show off your drawing ability or your draftsmanship. What it really shows, and this is not just you, this is for anybody, it shows that you know how to copy symbols. They spend a lot of time on their backgrounds because that's the main point of their story. That's what they're really trying to sell. But the character designs and the way they draw the figures and such, they look really simple. They use the same type of eyes, the same types of noses, and they really just become symbols. And what happens when someone draws a lot of anime is they can begin to mimic those symbols really, really well, but it has everything else kind of dragging. If you wanted to really put this piece in, I would really honestly take out those figures and the text, and I think you would have a really stunning image. I know you're trying to get it to look like a movie poster because it says Studio Berry Productions on the top. I would leave it out just for that reason. In terms of your technical ability though, I love the way you did the sails on that boat. That looks awesome. I totally believe the lighting. I love the way you're doing it. The colors are great. It's such a strong focal point. I would totally do this again without those characters and without the text, and I think it'll be a stunning piece. This piece, I think, has a strong story. This is one of those areas where knowing compositional principles would serve you well. I would actually crop off a bit of the right side of the image, mostly so that you can get that figure on the top right corner, get him out of the image because he's not really serving a purpose. It's also destroying the depth of the image. On the top left, I see that you have a few people in the background talking, and they're much more grayed out, but this figure seems to stand out much more, and I'm actually drawn more to him. If that's something you're going for, if you want that character to stand out, I wouldn't have him in the corner. I would have him more in the middle, kind of where you have the second guy, second to the right. It just works better compositionally. Also be aware that you have this main figure centered. If you were to crop it like that, pay attention to how you're drawing some of these faces. I know that angle is actually really tough to draw. I would get some photo reference. And the reason I say that is because you have this main character drawn so realistically. I believe everything about this figure. I believe the hands, I believe the face, I believe the folds and the clothing, but those figures in the back, I just don't. If you want to kind of disguise that, you could use whatever medium this is. I think it's charcoal, and just kind of block out their faces a little bit. I actually really like this. It tells a story, it's simple, it's friendly looking. I think you could probably use another situation for lighting. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I think that the lighting is good because it's dramatic, and when you get to that reveal of what is happening in the fishbowl, that fish is dead because this girl's overfeeding it, that actually tells the story very well. I don't think that that's shown as the focal point in your image. The only thing that gives me the idea that the focal point is the red, which is great. But when I compare that to the way you're rendering the face, I feel like that should be the secondary read. I think the first read should be the fish in the fish bowl with the red petals, and I think you should spend a lot of time putting the detail into that fish, and I really just mean using more contrast. If you look at how gray the fish is compared to how dark you've made the hair and the figure, I think it's a contrast that you would want to flip. I would rather see the figure be more gray and the fish have more darker lines so it simply stands out more. And also maybe change the lighting so that the fish pops out more. Your ellipses on the fishbowl look nice. I think that the arm is starting to get a little strange. Not the forearm with the hand touching or holding the bottle of fish food. I'm missing like the bicep and the shoulder. If a figure had her arm going up on a table like that, you would definitely see that. You would see some level of foreshortening. Your shoulders are probably a little too thin. If I were to draw a line from where this arm behind the fishbowl is going, I think the shoulder would reach out a little bit further than what you have it. But since it's not really a huge focal area, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's just a small thing that I noticed. Okay, so this next piece is your deck of cards. It's the number 10 specifically that I really like. I like the color that you have here. I am a fan of the way you're painting this tree. I think it's really, really cool. As much as I like the striations and stuff, I think you could be a little bit more random, meaning that something in nature, like a tree or rocks or something like that, you want them to look like they've actually grown that way. This looks like someone actually just painted how they think a tree looks. The only thing you need to do to really fix that is just paint some different types of contours, go across the tree in different kinds of ways to show the forms. That's really the only thing that's a problem here. I would also say it would be good to have some highlights on the right side of the tree since you have the light coming from there. You drew out what looks like a nose on the tree. It would be a good place to put like a white highlight. Make it stand out. Give me a focal point. This goes into the composition element as well. Every single image that you do should have a strong focal point. Think about what you want the viewer to see first, second, and third. Make sure you can draw the audience in. If we get confused and we don't know where to look at them, that's where compositional issues are at play. Make sure you balance those out whenever you're creating a piece. The other card that you have is the Queen. I would keep this out of your portfolio for the same reason I said about the anime poster, just because the way the figure is drawn, and also because the composition is too evenly balanced. It's kind of split into thirds horizontally. You have the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third. The Joker, I don't think it's as strong as the other two, so I would leave those out. Unless you really want to have them as a triptych, then I would actually put them all on the same JPEG file and just have them right next to each other. But like I said, I think the tree is your strongest of the three. I say adamantly, yes, this must go in your portfolio. This is a fantastic painting. I love the way you're using the medium and the colors. It is so delicate, the way you're handling the paint. It just looks really, really great. I know you have another watercolor piece. It's the hands and feet collage, and it has some watercolor in there as well. I would take that one out for this, because this shows a much stronger use of the medium. And it's just beautiful. It's so simple, but I'm really attracted to this. This is actually one of my favorite pieces in your portfolio, just for the way you're using that paint. If you have other pieces that are like this, I would totally put that in your portfolio as well, because this is a winner. All three of these pieces are very strong. I think all three of these can be in your portfolio. Whether they fit on the same JPEG or not is kind of irrelevant. First one, the composition is really strong and the colors work well. I would say you might be getting a little too repetitive in your rocks in the background, on the left side in particular. The line just kind of goes straight up and down. With something like rocks, you want to be a little bit more random. Throwing a couple of jagged lines in there. They don't have to stand out so much that it draws the eye to the point where you lose where the focal point is, or it's distracting from the focal point. But just a little more complexity, I think would be good. This image feels overwhelmingly cool. So what I would do is I would take a soft glaze of like a brownish red or orange color, go over some of that top of the water, because the sun is shining through. You want to have something warm. You want to have something cool. Either you have like a warm light and a cool shadow, or cool light and warm shadow. That's one of the only things I think you're missing in each of these three pieces, actually. But yes, I would definitely do that. I also really like this piece. The only thing I would say is your composition is way too centralized. I could practically draw a line right down the middle and hit every important element that you want me to see in this image. That's fine for like movie posters and stuff like that, but even then you'll notice that they try and be a little bit more dynamic. For example, this figure is pretty much just standing there, like right in the center. She doesn't have a huge presence on this canvas, even though she is the focal point. So I would maybe find a way to make her a little bit more dynamic. I also noticed the top wave is cutting right in the middle of the painting as well. I would take the time to get rid of some of your lightest lights. The reason I say that is because your figure is supposed to be the brightest thing, but the foam that you have on the water would say otherwise. It's really bright as well, and so I would just knock those back a little bit, just a soft gloss of a dark blue or something like that. If I were to give it a percentage, maybe 10 or 20%, just knock it back a little bit so that the figure will stand out more. I really like the jellyfish. That's probably my favorite part of this piece. And I love how you did the bubbles. Really stellar piece. Great job with the water textures. That's a very difficult thing to accomplish, and I'm glad you were able to do it. Maybe add some dark green, just because if you look at water in the ocean, it tends to have a greenish blue tint. You have a lot of the same kind of blue, so I would just try and vary it up a little bit. I think that will really help your piece stand out. I think this is great. Great understanding of perspective. The brick textures is phenomenal. The roof textures looks great. I think the trees in the foreground get a little lost. I think you could take some time and just make those shapes a little bit more clear, because green and red are complementary colors, and so they're going to fight against each other. They're going to stand out, but in some of the areas, the green is getting lost. So I think you should just take some time to kind of crispen up those edges, particularly on the right side. Those are really getting lost for me. Other than that, this image or this drawing is really, really great. Another way I'll probably fix this, have a little bit more contrast. If you were to close your eyes or squint your eyes rather, I think that the top of the steeple could be a little bit darker, and you could probably lighten up the sky just a little bit more. It's a subtle thing, but I think it'll really add a lot to show the depth in your piece. But other than that, it looks great. Definitely should go in your portfolio. Out of all the figure drawings, I would say this is actually your weakest one, and I wouldn't put this in your portfolio. The reason why is because you have a few anatomical issues. It's just screaming orange at me. I would first off knock the background by putting in like a grayish blue just so we have a sense of foreground and background. The anatomical issues I was addressing, one, the abdomen muscles aren't really shaped that way. There are kind of like 6 ab shapes on top of the belly button and then 2 on the bottom. What I'm seeing right now is you have all 8 above the belly button. So that automatically just tells me something's not right here. That's one thing that really is making me hesitate. The other thing is that arm. I'm really struggling to believe this arm. And I think the reason for it is because you don't really have any overlapping shapes. The bicep and the forearm, it looks very flat and it looks kind of like snowman-ish. Having a strong understanding of foreshortening and how shapes overlap is something that would be needed to fix this image. I like some of the way you're treating the skin, like in the chest and the thigh and stuff. But for those reasons I mentioned, I wouldn't put this in your portfolio first. This next piece I want to mention is this owl that you have here. It's kind of like a sketchbook page. I know you were asking about that in your artist statement, how much you should put in and what you shouldn't put in. This is a good example of something. I will say it gets a little gray, a few areas, so I would punch up that contrast, especially in the eyes. Usually if it's an animal or a human or something, we want to look there first. We want the highest contrast to be in those irises of the owl. Darken those eyes, fix the contrast because it's starting to get a little grayed out. It'd be better to have your image have a strong contrast than a weak contrast, because what it says to the viewer is that the artist was very indecisive as they were making this, and as an artist you want to show you're confident in what you're doing. Even if you're not, just fake it till you make it. There's a few other things that that are in your portfolio that I didn't get a chance to mention, and that's because I thought those were some of the weaker parts in your portfolio. I think if you're going to show the sketchbook pages, it would be better just to have 1 or 2 to show you your process, and it'd be good also to see the final result. So one of your sketchbook pages looks like it has a piece that's already in your portfolio. It would be great to show something like that. I wouldn't necessarily show 6 or 7 sketchbook pages just to put in your portfolio like that. You want us to be able to read it. Fewer the better. And you also have this stamp in here. It's kind of random in your portfolio. All it shows is that you cut something out, but doesn't show how that stamp actually looks. For your portfolio, I would probably stay away from it. Overall, I think your portfolio looks really good. With a few little changes, I think you're going to be set.